Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is CMGTalk. This is my subscribers channel. Thanks for joining me. This is Catherine Gallacher. Welcome on this lovely Sunday day. I like to talk about decision making and decision making types of models. There are different types of decision making. There's the thinking, thought, planning, rational decision making model, and it's called the rational making model or the rational decision making model. There's also then the type of model where you do the good enough, and sometimes it's referred to satisfying decision making model or the bounded rational decision making model. There's also the vroom-yeten decision-making model. That's often known as the yes or no decision-making model. You can also have the gut-based decision-intuitive model. And then there's the primal model. So there's different types of decision-making models. We can also make biased model decision making through our confirmed biases that sometimes we're aware of and sometimes we're not aware of, and sometimes that is based on survival basis as well. So there's lots of different types of decision making models, and often we are not necessarily thinking about what model I'm going to use unless we're maybe in a more formal environment where we're having to think about. Sometimes we set out in a more rationalising type planning approach model, and then we have to suddenly go into good enough, or I'm going with my gut intuitive model. Okay, so I'm going to use my example of Christmas presents. Now I celebrate Christmas, and I celebrate, I guess, what's termed the true meaning of Christmas, as well as buying presents. Now, every year we do the same thing. We don't tend to excessively spend in comparison, maybe to a lot of people. We don't excessively spend on Christmas, and family is really the basis for us. However, every year we do say we're going to cut back, and we do, right? And this year's no different. However, usually by now I'm well prepared. But there's been lots of things, right? I've had lots of challenges, as many of us have, and I wasn't as organised. But I'm going to be kind to myself, and I appreciate and understand why. I've been setting up new things within my organisation. I've been trying to serve my clients and serve the business and make sure that everyone's receiving the best service. And that meant that, I didn't get all my Christmas presents by now. I'm sure you appreciate that I've been trying to deliver on the best. But now I've been able to go on a subscriptions basis, which is great for me, for my organisation, because we've achieved that level. So I'm really delighted that I've been able to get there, because it's much needed. So when I made that decision, it was planned and thought out. It wasn't a gut intuitive or good enough decision, right? And it certainly wasn't anything other than, working hard and putting a lot of groundwork in and grafting in. Now, when I think about my Christmas present situation, you might find it entertaining, you might like to get carried away with listening to what I'm saying, that's fine, okay? However, the idea of me talking about decision making and using my example of Christmas presents, don't worry, there's not a spoiler alert. I'm not going to talk about what presents I'm buying, because I don't want people opening their presents and going, thanks, I heard your podcast and I knew you were buying me that. So I'm not going to do that. But what I would invite you to do is, when I'm talking about the different types of models, I'd invite you to apply it to your life. Whether you're retired, whether you're working in your own self-employed, whether you're running a business, whether you're working within an organisation, whether it's within your own personal life, whatever age you are, right? Think about how these types of decision making that you already do. Maybe you just don't label it. Or maybe there's some decision making that you do, and maybe you could apply one of these models because it would work better for you. Sometimes people come to me within my clinical practice and they'll say they're so indecisive. Maybe it's because they're not using a particular model they could use. Okay? So I was using let's think about it, let's plan, let's be rational about the decision I'm making. Now, I introduced the fact that I like to buy thoughtful presents. I'm not someone that does the last minute Christmas Eve running out. I couldn't be doing that, to be honest with you. Running out, buying last minute presents. Some people love that. They love the adrenaline, right? But no, that's not me. I like to think about what I'm buying people. People that know me, that receive presents from me, will know that I buy very thoughtful presents. They always say to me, well, you really put thought into that. How did you know I liked that? Or because I listen, right? And I like to think that I buy really thoughtful presents. Okay, so I thought about and had an idea, or I wanted to buy certain presents for these individuals, right? But obviously it depends on what's available. I'm in Scotland. Things have changed in the UK. So availability, right, and ranges of things, you have to go with what's available, right? I mean, I sound as if there's lots of big problems here. Well, there's some problems, but not big problems in comparison to many places. So I'm very appreciative of that. I have gratitude, okay? But I didn't know what exactly would be available. I also wanted to shop locally. So I knew what the problem was. I needed to buy presents. That's stage number 1. Stage number 2, I needed to identify, right, what and define, right, how I was going to solve the problem. Right, so I needed to solve the problem by locating where I was going to buy the presents, right? So information and resources, that's how I define that stage. Am I getting it myself? Am I sourcing it online? Am I going in person, right? Am I going to buy in advance, right? Or am I going to go along and see, right? Where am I going, right? If you think about, for instance, if it's a project at work, right? You know that you've got a project, but, how are you going to resolve that? What will resolve it? What do you need to resolve it? Right? Is it you? Is it, team members? Is it dividing up, particular tasks? What is going to give the solution? How are you solutionizing it? When I think about, if you're going for a hobby, right? You want to find a hobby, but how are you going to find that solution, right? To define what hobby it is. Right? Is it an indoor? Is it an outdoor? Right? Is it on your own? Are you taking someone? Right? Is it what's locally? What is feasible to travel to? You find out, the stages, right? Of what you have to go through to find the solution. Right? What's the possibles to solutionize it? Stage number 2. So I had in my mind and I filtered through what I needed to do. Third stage, I looked at each of those steps. How important is it to go locally? Do I want to do it online? Will there be enough time to get it online? Do I want to have to wait in for it to be delivered? I was looking at all these solutions. It matters, doesn't it? These things matter, right? Financially and budget, how much do I want to spend? How much can I afford to spend? It matters, right? How much is this project going to cost? How much is this hobby going to cost? It matters for many of us, okay? Who am I going to have help me out here? What resources, what information will it cost? Will it be free? Where can I source it? All of these things matter. So we start then filtering out what solution we're keeping and what solutions are top, and we start then rating these solutions, putting them in order of significance. That's level 3. 4. Is there things I have forgotten about? Right? Are there other things that I could do? Right? Okay? Is this the particular thing that I need to do? Right? Do I need to buy a present? Can I do something else? Right? Can I give them a hug instead? Okay, can you imagine? Well, okay, some people, that's what we do. Some people, we craft things and we make things, and many times I've done that, right? You know, many times I've made up presents, right? You know, rather than going and buying something, you know, a purchase, you know, a particular purchase, I went and I've, you know, made up or got together some things and I've made a hamper and, you know. So is there an alternative? Right, just as a project, is this the project I'm doing? Is this how I'm going to do the project? Is this the right thing to do? We start looking at other things, other solutions, other ways of doing things. What we don't want to do is to set off on going and doing something and then realising halfway along, you know, why am I doing this? This is not the right thing. So what you're doing is you're checking in. Okay. And then you're determining what's the best one to do. Okay? So what happened with me was I knew the problem. I needed to get some purchases. Right? I determined, after looking at all the solutions, I determined that the location where I was going to go, I determined that I had an idea of what I was going to buy, right? Because the location would have probably good selection, right? I also determined, you know, my cost and my budget. So I had the top and the bottom line, okay? And I also knew it was me that was going to do it. I wasn't going to get someone else to buy my present for me, right? Okay. I also sifted through to see if there was anything else I needed to do. And I knew what was more important. I needed to get the right location. That was the criteria. I needed to make sure I had the right budget. That was the next. And I also knew that whatever was going to be available, I had a good understanding. Okay. I had looked to see if there was alternatives. Because there was quite a range, when I was there, I also was checking out alternatives too. And I went through what those alternatives were. But then I got the best outcome. And I actually did I think I got the best outcome. However, evaluating the best outcome, in my situation, it's a present. You know, I get gift receipts, right? I buy the purchases, I get a gift receipt. But in my situation, I won't really know if it was the right outcome, won't I not, until someone opens a gift and I see their face, right? And I know that if it's not ideal, they'll take it back and I'm fine with them exchanging it, obviously, right? But if it's a hobby and you've evaluated it, you've looked, you know, you've decided you want to find a hobby, you've looked at and researched and you don't really know which hobby, or maybe you've got an idea, but you're not really going to know until you go there, you know, for the outcome. So you might do all the research, you might, you know, locate it, you might decide to do it online, you might resource it, you might look at alternatives, you might evaluate and look and see which, you know, different possible alternatives might be okay. You might decide what's the best one, you might try it out and it might not be for you, but hey, you've tried it out and now you know. And you can go through that evaluation process again. Okay, so that planned, rational way of thinking of decision making, right? That's the steps that you do. Okay, and often when it's a well thought out process like that, it might take a bit of time, but often we get good results when we do that. And I did, or I think I did. Time will tell on Christmas Day. Okay, the next type of decision making is where it's that type of looking at getting satisfaction. Okay, and what I mean by that is It's called the model where you are doing the good enough model. Sometimes it's known as the bounded model, the satisfying model. It might be known in different, terminology for you, but often people call it the good enough. It's a good enough, decision-making process. What you tend to find with this is that you're not looking for something that is perfect, ideal, right? You're looking for something that it does the job, it fits, it's okay, right? It's great, it does the job. And it's usually a kind of sooner. And what I mean by that is if your time is short, if you need to have something now, quicker, and someone presents a solution and you go, well, do you know what, it's not what I thought, or it's not what I expected, or it wasn't what I was planning, but it'll do, that's good enough. Yeah, I'll make do with that. That'll work. That tends to be the kind of model we're talking about here. Now, in that situation, right, if I had went for my Christmas presents and I couldn't quite find what I was looking for, if it hadn't worked out the way I'd wanted it to, I might have picked up something and said, you know what, it's not ideal, but it's good enough. It's something, right? And that's kind of my worst case scenario in a Christmas Day situation, to turn up and say, I couldn't really find what I was looking for, but it was kind of something similar, or it had to kind of make do, right? And usually that would only really happen in case of an emergency, right? And a few years ago, we had a situation where there was an absolute emergency around at Christmas time, and we were all running around making last minute purchases because, quite honestly, it was the last thing in our mind because we had an absolute emergency. And we decided we still were going to celebrate because that's what the person wanted us to do. Thankfully, they're still with us, right? And it's a very different situation, but we still remember what that was like. And we did a lot of decision making that, at that time with, this'll do. And sometimes we do that, don't we? It might be that you're making a special dinner and it burns, right? And you go, oh, well, let's get pizza. It'll do, right? Sometimes we make decisions, right? You do a project, it doesn't quite work out, but it's kind of, well, this'll do for the day because people are waiting for you to present and you get out there. You have to make do. It's good enough, right? Sometimes in life, it doesn't work out the way we thought it would. And that decision making method we apply. And we tend to apply in situations where we need to step in and say, you know what? That's it. We'll go with that. It's usually because we've got to a point where we need a decision to be made. We might have procrastinated. We might have got to a point where decisions being made and we're told you need to make a decision. And you're like, it's not ideal. Or it might be, it'll do. How many times do you think in your life there's been a good enough decision made? Or has it been that somebody stepped in and said, look, do you know what? I'm making a decision for you. That'll do. It's good enough. What does it feel like? Does it feel like a relief? The decision's been made? Or do you feel dissatisfied? Or do you feel, actually, that's okay. I'm quite happy with that. I'll go with it. Good enough decisions aren't always bad decisions, right? It can be a relief sometimes. I remember talking to someone, and I'm not sharing something I can't share, and they were desperate to get home after a particular difficult, challenging time, and they were given a downgrade to be able to get home. And they said, I don't care, that's good enough, just get me on a plane, I want to go home. Right? And that was the decision. They were told, look, you can wait, and get the same travel, but you have to wait a day, Or you can get a downgrade and get on this flight and I'll get you home right now. And they went, that's good enough, I'll get on the plane. And they did. Decision making, right? The rational decision making model, right? Or that good enough, right? That'll do model, right? These are different types of models. And we often recognise these models as we talk about them. But at the time, they're just decisions that have been made, aren't they? The next type of model in decision making can be that definitive type model. That it's yes or it's a no. And that definitive type model where it's quite clear, yes or no, but there are different stages we often go through when we're making those decisions. We often ask different questions to get to yes or no. It's very rarely that we just go yes or no. It's usually not impulsive. It's usually we've had steps and stages we've went through to think about it. And to get that yes or no decision making, we'll often be asking questions that are about the importance and significance. The importance, significance, and the integrity of what the decision is. We'll also talk about how important it is. Is it an I decision or is it a we decision? Does it have to be for me or does it include other people? We'll also think about things like, have I fact gathered? Am I well informed? That's saying knowledge is power. We'll often ask, do I have all the information to hand to make the right decision? The other thing I often talk to clients about is that if you're making a decision, usually the decisions we make don't just affect us, whether it's a work decision, whether we're retired, whether we have family, whether it's a social decision in a social group, it usually impacts and it has waves where it filters out to other people. Will other people go along with it? Will they agree with it? If you make a decision and it's a family-led decision, if you make a decision and it affects other people and it's a decision they're not happy with, they don't agree with, I often say to my clients, when you're making a decision like this, it's important to bring along the people that love you the most. Even if they don't agree with it, it's important for them to know why, to understand your reasoning. It's disrespectful if we make a decision and exclude other people from our thinking process. If we reason out, if we explain, I know this is hard for you to understand, but I've thought about this and I feel it's the healthiest or the best way for me to move forward. I know you might not agree with it and I understand and respect that you might have reservations, but I'm asking you to trust my process. I'm asking you to trust in me and believe that this is the best way forward. Even if it doesn't work out, at least I will know. If we go ahead and make a decision and we ostracise and alienate our people, we often feel very lonely and very isolated. So I'll ask, have you included your loved ones? Have you given them that voice? Have you not necessarily explained, as in looked for their approval, but have you respected them enough to let them know that this is what you're going to do? That's why people often get hurt and disappointed if we make a decision and we haven't given them any insight or any clue that we're going to do it. And people often say, I thought you knew me enough. I thought we had a strong enough bond. I thought that we were closer than this. I thought you would have let me know. Has it been well thought out? That's the next thing. Have you thought it out well enough? Have you looked at not just why you're doing it? Have you looked at the reasons to do it? Have you looked at how you're going to do it? Have you looked at what might go wrong and figured in the problems to be able to solve them? Have you looked at the things that you couldn't necessarily figure in? Have you asked people that have done it before and figured out what they've had to overcome? Is it something that other people relate to? Is it something that people can get on board with? Or is it going to cause havoc and chaos in that decision? All of these types of processes, when we're making a decision like this, it's really important. And these yes or no decisions, if you don't ask these questions, we can get a lot of confusion, a lot of disruption, and we can get a lot of people sitting on the fence. Yes or no decisions, when we're making decisions like this, we're often not or haven't gone through all of these questions and all these process steps. And if we're looking for people to be on board, it's really important that we do that we do actually go through a process of, have I thought this out? Have I figured this out? Have I actually gone through all of those necessary steps and understood the 5-prong process of steps? There's a model, I think, if I remember correctly, that goes through this. They relate it differently and relate it to work, I think. Vroom Yetin. It's a Vroom-Yetin decision-making process model. You can also look at that. It's similar to what I've just went through. But when I talk to clients, I talk about all these steps in decision-making. And if they're looking for a definitive yes or no, if you're looking for people to be yes or a definite no, you have to go through these different processes and steps to get the outcome. That's how it works. That's a psychological, process. Of course, we can also look at different ways of processing things intuitively. Sometimes when we are looking at ways of managing our thinking, we go by our gut. And many of us have made decisions where it's been intuitive. If you think about decisions that you've made, one of the purchases I made, I intuitively looked at it. I had planned out what I was looking for. I had thought it through. I had went through all of that, rigorous planning. But then when I got there, I saw something and I thought, that's it. My gut told me, they'll love that. That's exactly what they need. And I got it. And it was very similar to what I thought through. But if I hadn't went through that, well thought out planning, I might have been a lot longer in making a decision. But when I got there and I went into the place, I saw it and I thought, do you know what? That's what I'm looking for. Some people would tell me, well, you affirmed it. You put it out there and the world brought it to you. Right? It was a gut intuitive decision. Sometimes we know, our gut tells us, we listen to our internal self. Intuitively we know, it feels right. If you know, you know. When you know, you know. That intuitive model of decision making is instinctive. You think about any time that you've made that decision. It might have been a partner choice. It might have been in a purchase. It might have been in a friendship where you connect. It could be that you've decided to go on a career or a path or travelling away you've decided to relocate to where you're living now. You intuitively knew it was a good fit. It might be a hobby or a social group where you're connecting with each other. Sometimes we know when we know instinctively. We make decisions based on that. It works out. Of course, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe we've overridden some of those warning lights that have went on. But intuitively, our gut's telling us this feels right. And our gut usually will not drive us to the wrong conclusion. If we are constantly aware of what our core values are, if we're constantly being authentic to ourselves, being real and genuine and true to ourselves, and being kind within ourselves, nurturing who we are, we know when we know. So we've talked about that rational, planning, preparing, decision-making process, haven't we? We've talked about the good enough. That'll do. Right? That's the best option. That's what's come. We've talked about the decision-making, where it's a yes or no. We went through that 5-pronged step process. And then we've talked about the intuitive gut, instinctive process model. Then there's a primal decision-making model. And that tends to be different, right? It's led often by experiences and what instinct tells us. It's not a gut thing. It's more led by our experiences, what we've learned, what we've grown from. It's instinctive. We tend to have surveyed. We've looked at, we've analysed. And we tend to have overviewed what we think are the solutions with the information we have to hand. And then the next step, when we've looked at the solutions, we then go through, driving through and visualising what that's going to be like. So I've saw this solution and I drive through the outcome. I visualise how that'll transform. What will that look like to me? What will that feel like? So each time you've come up with a solution, you follow it through in your mind's eye with what it would lead to, what it's going to look like. It's like running a cinema movie of this solution, so you can see the end of it. You see how it starts, you see the journey, and you see the end to it. And then it comes through, and you look at all these different movies and you choose your favourite. That's kind of very basic, but that's really what you do. You've played out all of these different movies. You've basically played, right, the video. It shows you my age, doesn't it, when I talk about videos? You've basically put in the videos, right? Cinematographic videos, right? You've put in the video, you've played it through to the end, and then you've decided, which is my favourite video, which outcome am I looking for? Which one plays best to me? Right? And then you decide, actually I like that one. I'd watch that one again. And that's what you choose. So that instinctive type decision making, it is instinctive and primal. And often we use this when we don't have, it's not a well thought out, well planned one, like the first decision making. But often we use this when we have limited information. And when you have experiences you trust and learn and have grown from your past experiences, and you have that inner sense of self. So often people will say to me, I'll say, how do you know that was the right decision? Because they'll say, I made that decision and it felt the right decision. And I'll say, how do you know? And I'll say, it was instinctive. I knew, right? I've learned from the past. I had past experiences that were similar to that. And my instinct told me, I'd grown, it's different, it feels different. And although I didn't know everything, I didn't know everything about that situation, I didn't know everything about that person, but it felt instinctive. Instinctively, I knew there was something. It felt the right decision. And when you're playing out, you're using your imagination. Because you don't know all the information, you don't know all the details, but you're able to visualise. So you're using your modalities, you're using your senses, you're able to visualise and see, and you're able to foresee, if you like, in your own mind's eye. So you might not have all the facts, you might not have all the information, but you're not expecting to have. But you're able to see. It's like creating your own internal design, your interior design. If you're creative, if you're an artist, if you're an interior designer, if you start with a blank canvas, don't you? But you can see in your mind's eye what you're creating. If you're doing a project, you don't know exactly how the project's going to work out, but you have to start from somewhere and you visualise what your outcome is going to be. It might not be the outcome, might not be exactly what you envisage. Sometimes it's better. It's like everything in life. In this particular decision making, you're using your instinct, you're using your ability to visualise, and you're trusting within yourself. I've got this. You're trusting your past learnings, your past experiences, and you're trusting your gut. Your primal instincts were going to serve you well. So it's not an intuitive only based. You're using learnings as well. That's the difference. Whereas the intuitive one, you're just going on your gut base. Does that make sense? The next one, and the final one, is where you're looking at making decisions. And they're based on our biases, sometimes unconscious biases. Some people are aware of what their biases are. When we're making decisions, we all have biases, preferences. We all have ways of looking at things. But there are some things it's important not to let those biases get in the way of making really good decisions. It's like when you're in a relationship and you take that past relationship experiences that are not so good and they affect how you behave within your new relationship because your biases are taking over. When you're making a decision, if the decision is based on past experiences alone, which are not good, you self-sabotage, don't you? Sometimes being open to the fact that you're aware that you do have biases is crucial. It's fundamentally important. There are different types of biases that we have. Social, ethical, religious. There are different types of biases that we have that affect how we interact, how we connect or not, how we view, how we judge, how we experience or not people and circumstances. Sometimes it's not until we are faced with, or not until we are involved with, or we come into contact with, that we are faced with our biases. Or that our biases are challenged, or sometimes we overcome our biases, right? When you identify the different types of biases that you have, like confirmation bias is where you favour, you focus on information that you have an already existing or pre-existing belief, and you ignore the information that goes against that belief or counteracts that belief or challenges that belief. You have information that counters that belief, you ignore it because you have a confirmation bias. You only listen, you only hear, you only see what you want to see. You don't see it as it is, presented in front of you. You subconsciously choose subconsciously. You subconsciously are drawn towards things that align with what your confirmation bias is, what you already believe, see, feel is true. And that's one of the difficulties sometimes when people come, into our life and they have absolutes or they confirm biases because, or it's their upbringing, or it's what they've believed or what they've learned. Even if society or even if people are presenting something completely different, they are only filtering out information that aligns with what they have their confirmation bias is. There's also an availability bias. And that's what we access easily in our memory, in our mind's eye. Often we will give that information, that memory, a lot more credit. It's like a hypothesis. That's likely to happen because of what's presented before. And often we do that if we see something's happened and we then have a situation that feels similar and we automatically assume that the same thing is going to happen, but it might not, and sometimes it doesn't, and often it won't, right? But we have this availability bias because our memory tells us watch out. And sometimes people present to me within my practice and they'll say they're triggered because their memory tells them, their brain tells them, this is likely to happen because it happened before, it's similar to, but it's not actually the same because the other information is not being paid attention to. And sometimes it's not until you start looking at it's a different situation, you're moved on in time, it's not the same. And then obviously there's survivor bias. What we tend to do with survivor bias, we tend to access what worked before. And we tend to be drawn towards that as a preference. We might not look at alternative ways of doing things. We might favour because we think that, well, if that worked before, you stay with what you know, right? Why change, right? Right? Why just change the script? Just keep doing what you're doing, right? If it works, it works, right? The difficulty with that is you then ignore and avoid growth and change and development if you're constantly just staying with what you know. The success you've had was new at some point. That's what I say to people all the time. Of course, we want to look at how we got to where we are. That's important to reflect on that. But we don't want to filter out and ignore possibilities for growth and new and exciting challenges and opportunities, do we? Sometimes people say, yes, I do, because I don't want to be taken out of my comfort zone. I don't want to be in that stretch. I'd rather just be bored. I don't want to be in strain. I don't want to go into crisis. Of course not. But do we always want to be in our comfort zone and not be stretched? Yeah, if you remember, that's the Yerkes-Dobson definition of how we develop and grow, and our optimization, if you like. They looked at that within work performance, but it also works within our personal life as well. And then, of course, we have what's called the anchoring bias. Now, the anchoring bias is where you have a tendency to, or a preference to what you first hear, grow to, learn from, develop. And it tends to, and sometimes I tend to hear people when they anchor things like this. Anchoring can be used in different terms. I mean, I'm an NLP practitioner. And sometimes people talk about anchoring, right, in a different way. It's a different type of anchoring. But with this anchoring bias, it's where you give one thing. I've learned this, and, I heard this, and when I learned that's what I pay attention to. But they give so much weight to the first thing they've learned that they haven't really grown from that. They haven't changed the way they're thinking. They don't develop or challenge from what they're thinking. So they tend to often constrain themselves and don't give new information any kind of credence. They don't tend to consider other new ways of developing things. For instance, when somebody's anchored something very early on and they haven't then looked at how it's developed, how it's changed, that there's new ways of doing things, they often find then that later on in life, if maybe, for instance, they've learned how to work in their field in a particular way, and then their organisation has said, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're actually going to move over to a new platform, or we're going to be looking for people to learn a different way of doing something. And that person's not really moved with the times. Yeah. Or maybe somebody's learned how to do their work in a particular way, and then suddenly their company have said, you've been with us 30 years, and unfortunately now we're going to have to part company. Your job's been made redundant. Yeah, and they're then out there after 30 years in employment with an organisation, trying to get out there in a completely alien world of work because they haven't upskilled. Right? Also, it could be, that somebody is anchored a learning on, a particular individual, or learning a particular theory, or a learning on a particular way of being, but they just haven't moved along or grown or changed. Some people, their theory, their practice, the way they are moves and develops and grows. But if somebody's not prepared to take themselves out of that comfort zone and they just anchor without being prepared to consider other information and see that other information can be equally valid or just as important, or even consider it, as something to think about. They often can isolate themselves or they can constrain themselves. Anchoring bias. As I'm talking through these biases, I wonder if you're thinking about people in your life or identifying yourself with some of these biases. Biases are part of being human. We have biases whether we like to admit it or not. And then there's the halo bias, and many of us will have heard of the halo bias as well. And that's often where we have amazing or positive or really good experiences, or really good understandings or impressions of one particular outcome or solution. But what we don't really see is where it was flawed. We just see it as brilliant. It was amazing. It was fantastic. We don't really see where there were some difficulties or challenges or where it didn't really work out. We haven't really learned, and grown from the difficulties or challenges because we just see it was amazing. That was brilliant. Yeah, it's like seeing things with rose-tinted glasses. Oh, that was an amazing relationship. I don't know how it ended, I don't know why this relationship ended or why did this friendship end. It was a fantastic friendship. But from an objective perspective, others might be saying, actually, it was one-sided, or actually, it didn't feel right, or actually, there was gaslighting, or it was toxic, or it was unhealthy, it was codependent. We don't tend to see the difficulties. It's important to get balanced perspective. I guess that's what we're talking about. With the halo effect, we often don't tend to get a balanced perspective. We just see everything as wonderful and everything's great. The reality is, sometimes people say, but it's just I'm a positive person. That's not being positive when you have the halo effect, right? That's about seeing something but not seeing it as clearly or as truly as it really was. Sometimes it's avoidance, right? Sometimes you're not ready to see it as it was, right? Sometimes people go through life just seeing things as it was great. It was because they don't want to be touched by negativity. They don't want to have to look at the painful, the hard, the difficult, the uncomfortable. They don't like confrontation. But that's not life. Life has its peaks and it has its flows. It has its difficulties and its challenges. That's how we grow. We grow in the times when it's harder and it's difficult and it's challenging. These different types of biases are present within us at different levels and different degrees. Being aware of them, working on them, and being able to receive that we can challenge them is really important. When we look at the different types of decision making, we look at how to balance them out, and we look at how to know when to use different decision making. Sometimes we have to know what's called for. This particular point decision calls for a good enough decision. Actually, this is a more thought out, rational decision. Actually, I need to be intuitive, or actually this is an instinctive decision making. When we think about what's getting in the way, is it my biases that are getting in the way of me making a good decision here? Right? When we understand what stops us making good decisions, it helps us to understand why sometimes we might procrastinate. Sometimes we might get into different types of behavioural ways of being. Understanding decision making as part of a collaboration, decision making sometimes can be an either or. Yes or no definitive. Knowing what's a good decision making model is important. Can you see why I went through decision making? I made my decision making in different ways. I did a rational thinking through process. Then I did the decision making intuitively. I didn't use a good enough because I didn't have to. I wasn't using a definitive yes or no because I didn't have to. When we use different types of decision making, we can identify in our work, in our personal, how we then progress things. When we get stuck with decisions, it can be very difficult to move forward. Sometimes we're not ready. There's a readiness there. Sometimes we're not prepared. There's preparedness we need to do. When we understand how we set in the right model for us for doing that in decision-making process, helps us to then understand how to progress and move things forward in our life. Who knew there was so much to do with decision making? And unpacking different processes in our life and knowing what approach to use helps us along the way. So hopefully you find it helpful to listen to decision making and understanding those different steps along the way in each process of decision making. And with the issues, concerns, or the particular processes that you have to make decisions on, which model would you use? Would you use the rational, laid out process of thinking? Would you do a good enough decision making? Or would you look at doing the yes or no by doing those steps that I mentioned? Or would it be more of an intuitive gut type based decision making? Would you look at that primal instinctive, but also taking in past experiences and learned understandings? Or would it be something you would need to consider with biases? Would you need to be thinking about confirmation bias and availability bias, survival bias and anchoring bias, or the halo effect? So, whatever process we use, it's important that we give some understanding. And making those decisions can give us a sense of what. When we make a good decision, we feel what? We feel a sense of accomplishment and achievement. We feel that reward of validation, right? It feels good, doesn't it? And remember, it sets off releasing those natural chemicals that make us feel good. Oxytocin, the serotonin, and the dopamine reward. It's important to understand the process of decision making at any given time, so you know what approach to use. It helps us along the way, and it helps us to be unstuck. And it gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of clarity. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you've enjoyed listening to decision making and a better understanding of decision making, or maybe you've just enjoyed listening to the conversation, hopefully. All the best, take good care until next time. If there's a particular subject you would like me to talk about, feel free to email me on stepupcmg@gmail.com. You can visit my website on www.stepupcmg.com. I'm Catherine Gallacher, and this is CMG Talk. Bye for now, until next time.